Welcome to Zippers and Waistbands. I often hear from home sewers how they will go to great lengths to find patterns that don't include zippers because they've been so discouraged and so disheartened by the results they've gotten from putting a zipper in. And honestly, it is easier than you think, but the directions that come in basic pattern guides or in the actual package with the zippers, I think really make it a little bit harder than it needs to be. On top of the fact that many times the zipper foot that comes with the sewing machine is too wide. And if the zipper foot is wider than will fit on the tape between the teeth and the edge of the tape, like this one is barely fits on there and it's going to rub up against the teeth. A lot of zipper feet, look at the zipper foot that came with your machine, it may be even wider. And then if it's riding partially off of this zipper tape and all the thicknesses of the fabric, it will constantly want to be going to the right. And you'll constantly be pulling it back to the left, and pretty soon you have what we call a snake trail zipper. And that's the seam that just is all wavy. And that's not what you want. You want a nice straight seam. So again, that's why people get frustrated. So take heart. If the zipper foot that came with your machine is too wide and you realize that it's not narrow, at least a single toe narrow like this one, or even narrower, you can purchase generic zipper feet. And they are usually under $5. If you can believe that, at basic fabric stores, those zipper feet are available. They're also available online. We'll give you some information in the resource list. So set yourself up for success by having a nice flat bed to sew on and having a narrow zipper foot. Now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to mark our project to put the zipper in. What I have here and what's in the patterns that come with the class is a miniature skirt. So this is a miniature straight skirt, if you will, and this is the straight side. We're going to put the zipper in the straight side. You can see that part of this seam is curved. The next zipper we're going to put in, we'll put in the curved side. But in this particular case, we're going to use the straight side. We're going to put in about 5/8 to 3/4 inch piece of fusible interfacing in the seam allowance where the zipper is going to be applied. And the reason for that is that it stabilizes that seam, keeps it nice and crisp when you press it, makes it easy to stitch through, and it allows the stitches to set up on the fabric, and it just is a much nicer look. So it makes it easier to sew straight, and it makes a nicer looking zipper in the end. So we put our interfacing in. Then we took our zipper. In this case, it doesn't matter the length of the zipper. You can mark all of them the same way. So first of all, there's a stop at the top of the zipper. It's a little metal stop. We want that stop to be 3/8 inch below the cut edge of the top of the skirt where the waistband's going to go. Why 3/8? Because it's an enclosed seam, and like we talked about before, enclosed seams are going to be 1/4 inch. Your pattern guide's going to tell you sew it at 5/8 and trim it to 1/4 anyway. So I hope you've already trimmed it to 1/4. But in the very end, it's going to be 1/4 inch. And we want the stop of the zipper to be about 1/8 inch lower than that seam. Why? Because when we stitch that waistband on, we don't want to hit that stop. Obviously, we'll break a needle. So that's the reasoning for 3/8 below the cut edge. So I've made a mark at 3/8 below the cut edge. I've set my zipper stop at that spot. Then I've come down and and this is always a personal choice. I don't like this zipper stop at the bottom stop to show, so I always stop my seam just a little bit above that. So I've marked that, and then I've gone ahead and stitched my 5/8 inch seam allowance. Now this is one case where a 5/8 inch seam allowance is very, very important. You want 5/8 to put a zipper in. So we've gone ahead and we've backed up here so that we know that seam is nice and secure. So we've prepared that for this specific zipper. So here I have a second sample where I took it to the pressing station and I pressed up the 5/8 inch seam allowance. As you can see, I have not basted this shut. I haven't done anything but just pressed it open. Continue the pressing at 5/8. Now we're almost ready to put our zipper in. Now in the garment factory, the operator would just be grabbing the zipper and putting it in. Now you or I don't put zippers in every day maybe, and if we don't put them in every day, it would be nice to have a little bit of extra aid. So what I like to do is I use the little ruler that we showed you in the kit, and I mark my stitching line. That way I know I'm going to stay on track. So I mark my stitching line for a slot zipper between 1/4 and 3/8. Remember, you've got 5/8 there. You can't stitch it at 1/2 or 5/8 because it's going to be too far out, and then your seam is going to flop open too much and show your zipper, and you don't want that. So we're going to mark this one at just about 1/4 of an inch, and you don't want to go any narrower than 1/4 either. So I'm just going to take my gel pen here and mark my stitching line at 1/4 of an inch. And it's real, these rulers are wonderful because you can just line it right up on that edge. And then I'll do the other side the same way at 1/4. And you can use any of the clear rulers. I happen to love these little 6-inch, and that's why I recommended them. I always have it sitting one at the sewing machine and one at the ironing board so that I can just pick them up easily, and there we go. I kind of biffed it there in the beginning, but we got the right line now. Okay, so now I've marked the stitching line. Nice thing is, if you make a mistake with these gel pens, you just go over and hit it with the iron, the line disappears, and you can start over again. All right, so now to begin our zipper, let me just mark my 3/8 again, because once I press the seam open, guess what? Disappeared. My 3/8 inch. Okay. All right, so now we've got all these wonderful markings to keep us on track. And what we want to do now is we're just going to lay the zipper underneath on the right side. Get that stop just below that line I just drew, so just below 3/8, and unzip this zipper. Now, here's the key to having a zipper that doesn't show. This is to have the teeth flush against the fabric. So in other words, on the fabric side, I don't want to see the teeth. On the teeth side, I don't want to see the fabric. So they're very, very even. That's the real crucial point of making sure that the teeth don't show once you get your zipper inserted. All right, so now we just take it over to the machine, put it underneath. All right, let that needle hold that in place for you. Come back. Get that zipper teeth flush with that fabric. Thumb under, fingers on top, and now I'm going to back up a little bit to secure it. Then we're just going to stitch right down that stitching line. Remember, you're hanging onto that zipper because we don't want to ease the zipper to the skirt. When you get down almost to the bottom, stop with the needle down, zip up the zipper. Maintain that you're only covering the right side of the teeth. And now you're going to come down past the stop. Now you want to make a nice straight right angle here and come across. Now if you haven't marked your stitching line, then you count the stitches just like we did in the pocket. Okay, then we're going to turn on this. Now the main thing is just to keep these folded edges right next to each other, not overlapping and not far apart, but as close together as they should be. And then we're just going to stitch straight up our stitching line. Make sure you hang on to that zipper again. You don't want to ease that zipper to your skirt. And when you get up close to the top, stop with the needle down, hold everything in place, unzip the zipper, continue on up. And then, of course, you'll snip off the tails of the zipper that are sticking out. And there you have it. Now, because I've got the ink line there, I'll go to the iron and I'll make it disappear. But here's one we've completed for you. And you can see, and see how easy that was? There was no stress, there was no basting the seam closed. And let me tell you why you don't baste the seam closed. When you baste the seam closed and then you stitch the zipper in, you're kind of pulling a little bit against that. And the minute you let that basting go, the seam will come back just ever so slightly, and now you'll be able to see the zipper teeth. With this method, you'll be able to put in any color zipper. Let's say you were in a pinch and you needed a skirt to wear tonight, and all you had was an orange zipper and you were making a green skirt. You could do it. You could get away with it. I don't recommend it, but if you had to, you could get away with it because you've made sure that zipper doesn't peek out. So that is what's called a slot zipper. Now we're going to put a waistband on this where we have the slot zipper. So in your pattern pieces in your, that you've downloaded, you'll have a waistband. In this particular case, it'll be this shape right here, a rectangle. We're going to press the interfacing to one side. So if you press this in half first, then put your interfacing in right up to the fold. Okay? So we've got the interfacing in the waistband. Now, this brings up a point about interfacing. People often say, well, you know, one pattern says put the interfacing in the part that faces out. And then the next pattern will say put the interfacing in the facing. Which one is right? Well, in my world, what's right is the interfacing goes in the piece that faces the public. You want that nice, firm, almost sculpted look to show to the public. You don't want the sloppy, loose piece to face the public. You want that nice, firm piece. So we always want the interfacing to face the public. So I'm going to put a waistband on this skirt, and I want to know that my interfacing is going to face the public. Now, here's something that's very different than what you might be used to in your basic construction directions. Normally, they would have you sew it to the right side, bring it over to the wrong side, fold under the raw edge, and now try to stitch it down. But you're stitching from the wrong side. So if you're stitching from the wrong side, how many of us have done that? And we do a beautiful job. We hit right on the fold. The whole inside of our skirt looks beautiful. Then we turn it to the right side and we see that some of the stitching's on the waistband and some of it's on the skirt and so on and so forth all the way around the skirt. So it doesn't look anywhere near as pretty where it's seen by the public. I would rather do that type of stitching on the outside, so it's a WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get. So we'll start from the wrong side. So we're going to start from the wrong side of the skirt, and we're going to stitch the waistband, not the interface side, but the non-interface side. Okay, and we want a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I'm going to mark a 1/4 inch right here so you can see what I'm doing. And again, because this isn't all the seams on a waistband are enclosed, they would be a 1/4 inch. All right, so we're going to put this on right here above the zipper, and we're going to extend the waistband 1/4 of an inch past the edge of the skirt to allow for the seam that's going to have to take place there. So first we're just going to stitch this right on down. I haven't changed my foot yet. I'm going to have to stop and do that in a minute. But we'll stitch this down at 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. All right, we'll just stitch this across. Remember, thumb under, fingers on top. Hold that fabric. Don't ease it. Okay, so again, we've got this over 1/4. We've got it stitched along. Now, of course, if you were making a real skirt, it's a circle, right? But we're only doing like little mini projects here in order to get the practice quickly. And then with something like this, it's a small investment in fabric. You could make 3 or 4 samples before you actually went over to do it on your actual garment with your beautiful, more expensive fabric. Now you can go to that project with more comfort. So if you don't get it the first time, do it 2 or 3 times. Any old zipper will do. It doesn't matter what color it is. It doesn't matter what size it is. For this, we need something 6 or 7 inches long, much longer. We wouldn't have enough skirt to put it in. But anyway, just always practice. Okay, so now watch. This is a technique that was developed by my aunt, Margaret Islander, who developed the Islander sewing systems. The reason I'm telling you that is because it's got a very funny name. It's called the burrito technique. And there is no such thing as the burrito technique in the industry. This was made up organically from a class Margaret was teaching in Southern California back in the 60s. She had a woman who had recently immigrated to the United States in her class from Mexico. And she was having a very hard time translating the language and understanding the techniques both at the same time. And I can imagine that must have been very difficult for her. So all of a sudden, from the back of the room, Margaret says the woman finally got it. Finally, the light bulb went off and she went, I get it, I get it. It's like a burrito. It must have a filling, or it's just a tortilla. Okay, so now, that doesn't make any sense yet, but it's going to make sense in a minute. But that's why we call it the burrito technique. And the reason I tell you this whole story is because many people have heard that term and misinterpreted it. So they might have a pattern that says, here, do the burrito technique, but their directions aren't even similar to what I'm doing. So I just want you to understand that this is the true burrito technique. So what we're going to do is put the waistband wrong side down against the palm of your hand. Now I'm going to fold the skirt back out of the way because I'm going to be sewing along this stitching line and I have to sew across here to close up my waistband. This doesn't make sense at first. It can be quite confusing, so don't worry. You can rewind this several times and watch it over and over again. So now we're going to fold it right there on that fold line. And now turn it over. So now we have a burrito because we have a filling. If you make a mistake and it doesn't come out right, chances are you have a tortilla. And that is because you didn't fold that up in there. So we folded that up in there. Now we want to take 1/4 of an inch seam allowance to close up this waistband. So I'll do that first. And you don't need your zipper foot. I just haven't gone and changed mine yet. I don't think it'll make any difference. But I don't want you to think that you have to use a zipper foot for this technique. So we're going to start in front of the folded corner. It's always better to start in front of a folded corner and back into it because it very easily gets lumpy and bumpy and sucked down into the feed dog. So, all right, so we're going to come down here 1/4 of an inch. And sometimes you get it perfect and other times you don't. So rather than to keep going around the corner, I'm going to say stop right here, open up your waistband and see if you've stitched right next to the skirt, which I have. If there's a lot of extra waistband there, go back and sew closer until you're as close to the skirt as you can possibly get. Now, here's where this is the trick to the whole thing, and the reason that you're doing all this is so that the corner at the end of the waistband looks nice and neat and clean. And that's a spot, for those of you who have made many waistbands know, it's very difficult. And maybe you've come up with some tricks over the years to get it to look as well as you can. This will look nice every time. Now I've turned it over so I can see this previous stitching, because I want to stitch right on that previous stitching. Or I want to stitch inside of it, which is to the other side of the seam allowance. The reason is that stitching is going to show if I don't stitch right on top of it or beyond it. So we'll go ahead and we'll stitch across here, because I think we're close enough. And we just use that previous stitching as our guide. And you only stitch down maybe 1.5 inches to 2 inches. Make sure you definitely back up, because this is a serious stress point when we go to pull that skirt and zipper back out of that waistband. So that's what it looks like so far. And now we're going to cut this corner off. Why do we cut a corner off? Because we know when we turn this right side out, this seam will fold in here and this seam will fold in here. By taking that corner off, I still have some filling in here, but I don't have it overlapping. That's the key. You still want filling in the corner. Here's another tip about filling in the corner. Don't ever cut this one off. This does not need to be cut off, because look, it's not going to be a problem. It doesn't have an opposing seam up here, so it's going to lay nice and flat in that corner. It's going to make that corner have more integrity, and it's going to make it easier to top stitch through. If you take that out of there, which some pattern guides will tell you to cut that corner, or sometimes the seamstress thinks, well, you have to cut all corners off. This is a case where you don't. When you go to top stitch this waistband, if that is empty in there, and now you're sewing through 2 layers instead of 4 layers plus another layer of interfacing, so really 5 layers. When you go from here to that empty spot, you'll lose your tension. You'll hear the machine make a funny noise. You might get a big loop in the thread, and you'll have this beautiful top stitching continuous all the way around your waistband until you get to the corner, and then it'll clunk and make a big mess. So keep that in mind. Now we're going to pull this out and see how we did. And this is where the point turner comes in handy. You can get the corners out nice and neat. And you just want to take your time. And it's not about pushing the point turner into the fabric. It's more about folding the fabric back over the point turner. If you do it that way, you won't go through the end ever. And I know, that's a really easy thing to have happen. You go right through that corner and rip the fabric and everything. So be very careful and get that till you can get it nice and square point there. You'll take it to the ironing station and you'll press it. You'll press this seam allowance right up into here. But to save time, and because this isn't a skirt that anybody's really going to wear, I'm just going to do a little press with the this little wooden point turner. Now what we're going to do is we're going to top stitch around the waistband. Again, this is just a practice, so it's not very long, but it'll give you the idea, and you can practice this a few times on the smaller projects, and then move on to a real project, slacks or a skirt. Now, it is time to take the zipper foot off. And now we'll top stitch. Top stitching often scares seamstresses or hobby sewers because it shows, and especially if you're working with a contrasting thread. So a couple of things to take note of in order to keep good quality straight top stitching. And that is to have a nicely pressed project. Interfacing also helps a lot. And then knowing how to aim down that stitching line. Often I see where people think they've got to aim the needle down there, so they're watching the needle. Well, that'll probably make you dizzy as you watch that needle. So rather than watch the needle, find a sweet spot on the foot that you're using. And every sewing machine manufacturer makes a multitude of feet, and they're all different shapes and sizes. And so you'll find that one spot that if you aim that down the edge of your fabric, that it'll keep you right on track, rather than trying to aim that needle down that fabric. So for me, I like to, on this particular foot, and I really do enjoy using this one, I will, I have this little spot that I aim on, and it's part way through the right toe of the foot. So I'm going to aim that where it's almost at the fabric, but not quite. I hope you can see that, but that's, I know I'm going to hit that on the edge of the fabric. And again, we're going for the needle width away. Remember the needle width away, because that nails those edges down nice and firm and gives it a very nice, fine, ready-to-wear look. And that's the look we're going for in this class. Now, to get this to look just as nice as possible, we're going to fold under this edge 1/4 of an inch and lay it right on top of that previous stitching. So theoretically, the stitching I'm doing on the top here is going to end up in the same place that the stitching was that constructed the waistband to the skirt. We're going to thumb under, fingers on top, because we don't want to be easing when we're top stitching. And so now we'll just top stitch down. Make sure you just set that right on top of that previous stitching, not too far. And stitch down. And when you get to the other end of the skirt, of course, you're going to turn the corner. So we'll pretend that we're there. And we'll turn the corner. And we'll stitch up. And a little bit too close to the edge there, so I'll just pop this up. There we go. All right. And again, we would have pressed this if we were making a garment. But when I'm making samples, I like to take a few shortcuts that I wouldn't take when I was making a garment, because I'm just trying to practice the technique. All right, so we're going to come right to the corner. Turn the corner. Oops, almost went too far there. Okay, and there we go. See how nice that is? Nice and flat, square corners, just that easy. Now this is the kind of waistband, we call it a sporty waistband because it's, with the top stitching, it's usually considered sportswear. So it's the kind of everyday kind of sewing or everyday kind of garments that you would put a sports waistband on. So that's our slot zipper and our sports waistband, and we'll be back and we'll be doing a lap zipper and a little bit dressier waistband.